guys. So today we want to talk about the um, very tough topic of third-party consultants. And I get asked about third-party consultants, um, from time to time. I think we all are dealing with them a little bit more often. So I felt it was timely to start bringing this up because some people that did normally deal with them are starting to do so. So I'm going to get started. So that's what we're going to talk about today is third-party consultants as they're involved in emergency services, because I believe that that's going to be both of us. They do exist in reconstruction as well, but I also wanted to really talk about mitigation today and for a very specific reason. So on the webinar today with me, I've got two, again, like I said, close friends and close colleagues of the industry and people I really, really look up to. We've got Sergei Guk. Sergei is I'm not sure of how long you've been in the industry. I think it's about 100 years, Sergei.
18 years of September 2nd, man.
18 years, based out of Phoenix, Arizona, okay, with Restoration HQ. And I know that you deal primarily or completely in the commercial field. So that puts you in a very good spot to talk about this subject because you probably have a lot more exposure than some people. And then over across the aisle is the famous Chris Laney. And most of you may know, and Chris is the first one that will hate my description here. I call him an industry icon. He's the first one to tell me that I must be drinking on the job, and I wish I were. But Chris, you really are. Chris came up in a time with some mentors that I know that I only hear myths about. Kurt Bolden came up with some incredible people, had a lot of exposure to a lot of great things. And Chris, I believe you're in your 12th or 14th year with your own company, Water Out.
We've been in business 18 years now.
Oh, 18 years. So have built an incredible business. And I didn't put where you're from here, Fort Wayne, Indiana, but I know that you've spread out across the whole country and worked nationally. And again, you and I talk about this subject offline from time to time with these third-party consultants. Some people still say administrators. There is a little bit of a difference, and we'll talk about that. Real quick, who I am. My name is Clark Brown. I own a firm here called Restoration Advisors, where I'm a coach and a consultant to small to medium sized restoration contractors. I've been in this business for 19 years with a lot of experience in the commercial, large and complex losses. So I've certainly had my dealings with third party consultants. And I'm also affiliated with a few other things. I'm very much a very networking guy in this industry. I love what we do. I'm one of the co-founders of the Alliance of Independent Restorers. I am a professional member of the APA, the American Policyholder Association, where we stand up for the rights of the insured against bad faith and fraud by carriers and independent insurance entities. And then lastly, where it contributes to this conversation is I teach with Tom McGuire in Large Loss Mastery Elite. It's his company. I'm just a guest teacher and speaker sometimes. But we teach and talk about doing projects within the restoration, mitigation, emergency services industry and making them trigger audit proof. There are triggers that cause audits to happen. And we talk a lot about third-party consultants. So all of this kind of ties into that. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for both taking out your time. And I know, Sergei, it's probably still morning for you, isn't it? It's 11? Yeah. Cool. Well, Chris, I appreciate you being on too. So can everybody see the slides? I want to make sure before I go into the slides that everybody has got a visual on what we're presenting on. Can I see a yes from Robert Hidijit? All right, great. Well, topic number one is what are third-party consultants? And I'm not going to dominate the conversation. I might read what we start into, and then I want to kind of kick it over to our co-panel host here. But in general, TPCs are third-party consultants, not to be confused with third-party administrators. Third-party administrators are simply pretty much playing quarterback for the insurance companies to assign losses to preferred vendors and whatnot. A third-party consultant is an individual or a firm that is hired directly by the carrier on a loss-by-loss basis. And they might be called out to settle some disputes. They're for many different reasons, for engineering reasons. Some of them are building engineers. They may be called out to handle a very complex loss where there might be 6, 8, 10 different contractors on the job, and just manage that. But more often than not, and I'm not being, this is going to be a very positive professional if we can, but they are there to review the billing, the scope, and help manage the cost to help make the insurance companies, not lose their teeth. Now, that is the part that I want to talk about today, and we will get into more of that. But it's a very real thing. But I think there's two sides to that coin. So let's discuss this. Chris, how often, what's your dealings with third-party consultants, and what's your experience?
Commercial losses, commercial mitigation claims. Typically, you see those guys come in when it's $100,000 and more, and the cost of the claim starts to rise. It is amazing that we're starting to see them on the residential side as well, and that's just kind of pretty new. And it seems like some of these carriers are bringing them in on some of these projects where you typically would never see them. And so at times, I think it puts restorers in a position where they feel like they're being attacked, or the carrier's not agreeing with what they're doing. And like you said, those guys are there to do a job, and you got to put the emotion to the side and just work with them through that process. And when you do that and you can document it, management and manage the claim, I think you find that they'll work with you. And if they don't, then it's time to go back to the adjuster and the client and keep them involved in that process.
Still dealing with one. It was a large fire as well, and the consultant was hired and they came in, and unfortunately, the consultant wasn't really aware of the regulations and standards, which caused us to have to go through and educate them. But you know, it really feels like they're coming in. They're not there to really help move the process. There is a different agenda, and it's frustrating. We're still kind of dealing with one, but I think we've kind of overcame that. They attempted to use certain state rules and regulations against one of our line items, which I'm thinking you're going to touch on later, so I'm not going to get into it just yet. But it's always interesting. Luckily, very often, if we educate the customer on the front side, we've noticed that it's a lot easier to deal with them. And the customer will go to bat for you should you give that information to them up front. You're muted.
On my end, that was you were getting a lot of echo, but I didn't want to interrupt because I don't know if that was for anybody else, but I heard what you said, but there might be an echo. Do you have your camera and your computer picking up microphone by chance? But as long as everyone else heard that, I'm sure it was amazing. Good. So it's just something on my end, guys. I'm gonna muscle right through it, but I heard what you said, and I want to pick up on what Chris said. We're gonna talk about that next slide. Is we're starting to see the TPCs show up on smaller than $100,000 jobs, and yes, even on residential. Again, residential. I think there's a couple of carriers that say automatically over $3,000 is going to go to a third-party consultant. I think there are different levels of third-party consultants. I think there are those that review from the desk from across the country that never show up and have no real acumen or talent in what we do. And then I think there are those that were really professionals, possibly used to do what we do and have now, or used to be adjusters, and they're now in a very professional role. So I will say I have two categories for third-party consultants: those that couldn't dry the way out of a box of cereal, and those that really have done this and probably are approaching it pretty professionally. Would you guys agree with that?
Well, it was interesting. I was on a conversation yesterday with a gentleman working out in Iowa, and a TPC came on to the claim and mitigation claim, $300,000-$400,000 water damage, and they brought in another restoration company. So you got the carrier that brought in the third-party consultant that brought in a restoration company to now look at this, through a different lens. So I think the biggest thing, put a hat on a hat. When those guys show up on a job site, put a hat on a hat, walk through that job site with them, answer questions, and go through that. But yeah, we're seeing it's ever changing, it seems like.
Dealing with a loss right now with a client up in New York State, and there is the client, there is the primary carrier who I actually haven't even heard from yet. Sedgwick has jumped onto the job, and a third-party consultant and a restoration contractor as that's coming in to do the GC work, but they've actually assigned them as the overseer of the mitigation. So the complexity and layers of these jobs are enough for anyone that's not used to this to really say, this is where your project manager has to become a true project manager. This is where you can't be a superintendent of the work that's going on. You need that person. But a project manager needs to kind of scale back and say, who all am I dealing with? Who needs to know what? It's something I teach on is loose lips sink ships. Don't say the wrong thing to the wrong people, or you're going to be really, really, really hurting. So on this slide here, we're talking about they are showing up on some smaller jobs. That's why this is relevant. That even if you don't do commercial, even if you don't do 300,000-400,000 in Iowa, you're going to start seeing more of them because they found out that this works. This is contributing to incredible profit margin. Arguably, I think our industry, we all three will say this a lot, our industry is incredibly saturated with a lot of people who do not do a very good job, and they probably are pricing themselves way out of what's realistic and what's fair and reasonable. So I will give them credit a little bit, but we're seeing more of it because we've asked for this. We've allowed this to happen. If you're currently involved in or planning to enter the world of commercial, large loss, or complex, you're going to need to be prepared. So that's a big thing today is those of you watching, listening, or even if the recording later, this is an area where this might sneak up and surprise you. You might think that the most important thing you need to know is how to run desiccants and how to run generators and size up equipment, or even how to scale, whatever, get fuel or something. But this is something that should be on your radar. And I hope that you will start investigating and seeking out information from peers that do this a lot, maybe sneak onto their jobs and see how they deal with it. Any closing, any statements on this slide before we go on, guys?
Documentation size, just being prepared for that job before it comes in. And like you said, it's not just about sizing equipment. It goes into a whole lot of other items as well.
On this slide, I just threw this in last minute. I put this slide together last night, this slide deck, but I found this today. Someone sent this to me. The top is cut off, but this is from Forbes magazine 2020, the 50 most profitable insurance companies. And it's kind of blurry. I hope everybody can see this here. I'm wondering if I go full screen, if it's going to help. This is their profits. USAA, 4 billion. Allstate, 4.8 billion, 5.56 for auto or State Farm. I'm going to go here and find Laney's favorite one. It's down here. It's really hard to see. It's Erie somewhere. They've got their hat in the game a little bit. I say that's everybody's favorite, right? But listen, and look, I am not against this. I'm a capitalist. I'm a business person, and I applaud companies for being profitable and having their systems figured out. But I'm showing this for one reason today. It's important to remember this is all that they're trying to do, and all of their actions and all their process and procedures that we find to be a pain in our ass is really just this company with the vision of being profitable for all their reasons and being very good at it. So they're winning, but they're not doing it personally. I think Chris said that. They're not taking this out on you. You just happen to be getting caught up into their process of, and it's many multifaceted, and TPCs are part of that. But again, it's important to know. Now, if you want to take this when you're having a really difficult time, what I would do if you're having a difficult time with a claim, a homeowner or business owner or adjuster, bring this up and say, I'm a little I don't understand how AIG had 3.3 billion this year in profit, and you're wanting me to cut $1,000 off of a $4,000 job. I did the work. We're talking about Monday morning here after the job. I'm not really certain how you, or how much is it costing you to pursue this or whatever. So this is just something I wanted to throw in there, and I think right here in the middle it says they're not attacking you. Don't take it personal. They don't ever come out and say, "Man, you guys just didn't do a good job. I found a wet subfloor. I found I found some soot behind there." They don't do that. They don't QC your work because that's not in their radar. So next question I get a lot of times is, how do I better prepare for this? And I think this is what Chris was alluding to, and I certainly want to give you guys some time on this. What's the homework here? What can people start doing today, Sergey, to better prepare if they're not dealing with this now, if they're going to in the future? What can they start doing?
Well, it's not going to be one single thing. I think Chris will agree. It can't be just one thing. It has to be a multi-layered approach. I'm a big believer in layered approaches. We practice this at home. We lock our doors, we secure our gates, and we arm our alarms. So kind of the same thing. What we've done is we've really focused on technology to help us get to that point. What I mean by that is, little things like having GPS tracking in your vehicles. It's very affordable. There's a lot of them out there. Often it comes up, it says, "Well, I don't think you were there that many hours." Well, Mr. Consultant or adjuster, here's my GPS records of us there. Well, I don't think it took you that many hours. Well, here's a signature from the client that we clocked in at this time, clocked out at this time. And you just have these layered approaches, but you also need to really heavily document your internal process, your checkups, your demolitions. It is possible that guys can take longer to do a job, and the TPC may actually be right in this one little field that you charge them 14 hours to demo out, 35 square feet of drywall. That's going to be questionable. So those documentation processes work both ways. They'll help get you paid and justify why you're charging where you are. It'll help you improve your process. I'll again go back to the claim, the one that we're working on. When we started, me and the TPC, we were $45,000 apart. We're now $3,300 apart. And it was through documentation and everything that they were asking for, because they were looking for any gap, any hole, anything that you have to exploit it and show that they don't have to pay for that. So I can't stress it enough. A lot of guys think that a handwritten note is sufficient. It may be, but if you find yourself on a 150, 100,000, or even $50,000 loss in a residential, it's not legible. That's going to give you some headache and some heartache. So documentation should be a multi-layered approach that is constantly evolving and trying to stay ahead of them. And do internal studies. We do case studies on our own projects that had a hard time getting paid or whatever happened, and we try to identify the weaknesses. We try to find out where did they get us on it and try to improve on that.
Awesome. That's awesome. Chris, you got anything to add to that? It's a pretty good answer.
Yeah, I think he hit on a lot of great points. We look at response, documentation, and communication are the three key points of what we try to do on each and every loss. And the processes that Sergey was talking about are the most important thing, and making sure that you're consistent in those processes each and every job. I mean, when we GPS track our employees through T-Sheets and clocking in and clocking out. T-Sheets is a very, very cost-effective software that we use, that in those scenarios where somebody says, "Were you there?" Just like you're talking about, Sergey. Yes, we were there. Here's when the technician clocked in. Here's when the technician clocked out. And so all those little things on the documentation side, taking photos every single day, photo every piece of equipment. Sometimes we look at it and say, do they think that we're trying to cheat them? Do they think that we're lying to them and we didn't have these things there? Well, I can tell you, when you build a beautiful documented file and you turn that in, you're ultimately trying to, build layers in between you and questions that they might bring up. A lot of guys say, "Well, I can only charge for an emergency response one time." We just did a $55,000 water damage, and we charged for every single team that responded to that loss after hours. They had 7 emergency response. There's 7 teams that showed up. They got 7 charges for that. But we photoed every truck outside of that outside of that loss, we photoed the hoses going in from each and every truck, and ultimately you're trying to tell a story, and if you can't read that documentation and it doesn't answer all the questions for you, you left something out. Just like Sergey said, you left a hole, and that hole gives them ammunition to try to come in there and pick that thing apart. And so, um, man, I can't scream enough how much documentation is so important. And right now, I think software in our industry is still lacking, and I think that there's a lot of improvements that can still be made. But find a software that works well for your company, put a process in place, make sure it tells a story. And I love what Sergey said. Go back and look at your files and find out, where you had some holes, and things that you guys can change in your process, to make the next one not have those issues.
Call that an AAR, an after action report, which is everything that we do. There's good and bad, but if we repeat our own mistakes, it's our fault. It's nobody else's. So that's certainly a good practice. And I think I do like that both of you said you're including others. I think so many times um, smaller companies or those companies that are stuck in their own, the owners are the only ones putting their attention towards planning for this. And I think you both alluded to your teams now understand. And two things I always do when I start out with these is I get the team together. And first, I talk to the consultant. If I know that there's a consultant coming out from JSL, Young Associates Meridian, I just dealt with DBI, I ask them, what's your thing? What's your thing? What's that one thing that you're probably most scrutinizing about? So that what can I do to make this thing more successful for you, our mutual client, the insured, and just to how do we leave this as buddies and friends and not enemies? And we're going to see each other again. And so they'll usually tell you, it's like, listen, I don't want excessive amounts of supervision or this or that, or I don't want to see anybody buying a can of Copenhagen and putting it on an invoice. Check. By the way, that happens. Secondly, start with the end in mind. Tell your team, just like Sergey said, start with the end in mind, saying, if the adjuster says, I don't think it took 14 hours to do that demo, but your guys say, oh, of course it did. The dumpster was 2 flights down and over across 2 parking lots. Document that. Talk about how, do a study on saying, have the dumpster been on the first floor of this job? We probably could have done this in 8, but the fact that we, 40% further, it's going to be 40% more. Have your guys get good at arming themselves with that kind of talk. So it's really good stuff. Does anybody have any questions from the audience or any of the people watching?
As we're waiting on that, Clark, I'll say one thing. If you touch a file or an employee touches a file, they got to put a note in, and notes ultimately are going to help you tell that story. We don't divulge our internal notes, but boy, do they help us in that communication and the timelines.
Question, I grab it.
Which question?
The one that Robert just typed in.
Yeah, go ahead and read it.
So it's actually it's again the same project. So the question was, have you had a project with what you think is a perfect documentation, but the TPC still gets you on something? That's at 3,300 that we're stuck on right now. Everything was documented. We had our client sign off. We used ClockShark instead of timesheets. So we had GPS records. We showed the path that our guys walked. It was exactly what Chris said. It was an underground in a basement. The dumpster had to be placed further away because this was a resort. So my guys had to walk further distance. We showed them this. We showed them the GPS records when the trucks got in there. The T&M sheet was signed every day by the client that, yes, we showed up at this time. It was this many guys. Everything was perfect. Out of the 45,000 that was difference in between their estimate and our invoice was we've recovered 42,000 of that already. The 3,300 that we're stuck on is them trying to use the term that you don't get to charge after hours fees unless you spend more than 40 hours on this project. And they're using our Arizona state mandate that says this is when you get to charge it. So we're stuck in this verbal battle that this is not overtime, this is after hours. So there was nothing I can do with documentation. We're slowly picking away at it. And the problem is the TPC, when they get to this frustrating point and you're not buckling down, they sometimes will show a weakness in their plan. And we found that. And if they want to use the Arizona laws and the regulations, what's happened now is we were 3,300 apart. His invoice just went up by 17,000 because he wanted to use Arizona mandates, and now it's silent. So I'm still fighting with it, but it will happen. You will have everything perfect, and they will still fight you on it. And there'll come a point where they stop responding, they stop communicating. Luckily, it's because we had the relationship with the client, and when as soon as the TPC got assigned, the first thing I did is what the adjusters do. I went to the client, I educated and informed them, and I made sure they knew what's coming down the pipeline. So when I had the conversation with the client saying, "Here's where we're stuck at," he literally said, "Wow, you told me this was going to happen." I said, "I did." So now he's fighting that battle because he is the insured. So there's ways around it, but you must prepare for that, and it will happen. I mean, and there's been other times where we had weak documentation because the guys missed certain things, and we still got paid for everything. I don't know if there's a 100% recipe that's going to say that just because you document everything perfect, you'll always get paid. Because at the end of the day, they got to validate their reason to be there, and most of us are not perfect, including myself.
There's no silver bullet.
No, there is, and I think there's a lot of. I think it's going to be from different consultant to consultant. They've got different backgrounds. I will tell you that when you go into an area-wide disaster in a cat zone, like right now the wildfires or the impending hurricanes, their load of jobs is going to stack and stack and stack, and they're going to want to just open them up and shut them down quickly. And you're going to see more of a systematic chopping and less about logical. So you've got to, again, I think what all of you said and what Robert's asking is, yeah, we could do it right, but unless we ask that guy up front, what's going to be the stall? What's going to cause this not to get paid? But Sergei mentioned my favorite topic in the world right now, and maybe it's going to be for several years, onboarding your customer. I'm putting together an online course about that. I think it's something we just don't do well enough, and I think it could always room for improvement. In some cases, a lot more. And this would be one of those: is arm your customer about who this third-party consultant is. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you, Robert, for that question. Thank you, Sergey, for that answer. Can they really cut my invoice? I didn't put any. Forget the right side. I didn't put anything on the right side. I used the template. So can they really cut my invoice? Not really. Not really. They don't have the authority. They don't have AOB. They're not the carrier they are hired by. They're making recommendations. And I want you to remember that word, recommendations. Recommendations means based on their experience, which may be less or more than yours, may be tied to a lot of different things. They're going to recommend a different one. I'm working on a project right now with a third-party consultant on that job I mentioned earlier. And he's asking that, we turned in all the TM, the daily logs, the daily sheets, every human that was on that job for every hour and their position was there, daily notes of what they did, what they achieved, and what they were expecting to do the next day. What he came back on was two things. One was we want to cut your overtime instead of being after 8 hours, and he's in New York State. Instead of 8 hours, it goes to 40 hours for the week. Now, why does that matter? Some people say because not everybody worked every single day, but you have to pay, and the client pays people overtime after 8 hours of the shift. And then secondly was the rates. Luckily, my client had a contract in place that had both of those things spelled out in writing. This is my rate for a restoration technician. This is what a restoration technician is and why they're not general labor. And number two, this is how I will bill an invoice for my timing. And that's going to be after 8 hours and not after 40 hours. So he made a recommendation, and we literally had a conference call about that and said, listen, we understand that might be applicable in some places, but there's a contract in place for this. This is how we do business all day, every day, throughout this region, throughout this market. And so that was really important. But can they cut your bill? I will tell you this, and I'll turn it over to Chris. If you're not prepared, if you're not including your client, and if you're trying to go in there and be the bully, you better expect your bill is going to get paid. Chris, what say you?
Hey, as long as we get paid, we're good, right? It is. They are just recommendations. And a lot of times, either it's TPAs or TPCs are working off of specific guidelines that they can work within. So their recommendations, they can't include supervisory time. They can't include during hour service calls. They can't include some of those specific things. And it's not that they don't agree with you. It's just the guidelines that the carriers put them under don't allow them to put them in their estimate. So at times we get a little creative with them and say, well, what did we miss? What items did we not put on our invoice that you can agree to get the numbers to the right spot too? So there's always ways to kind of move around that. We do that with supervisory time. We got a couple carriers locally that don't want to pay supervisory time, and what we're doing is fine. We'll put it on our invoice. We submit it, and we'll tell them put it into EQ then, and they'll put it into equipment setup, take it down, and monitoring. I don't care how they categorize those things, but what they're ultimately making are recommendations. And as you're having any communication with them, they love to get you on the phone. I love to do it via email because we can track it, and I can ultimately attach the adjuster and attach the policyholder to those communications so everybody sees what those communications are looking like. It's not just, oh, we had this conversation over the phone. We now have it documented where everybody can see it. So always getting the policyholder involved in that whole entire process. And I think what you're putting together for the onboarding just ultimately makes it easier when you're dealing with us on the back end when you onboard them properly.
Yeah, and that course, guys, I'm not here to promote it and sell it, but I'm going to tell you right now, I'm hoping it really, really, really changes some things. It will not be an end all be all because there will be very, very specialty things that you do better than what you're going to see in the course. And there may be areas of the country where that doesn't exist. So I'm really excited. I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to be home for the next 4 weeks and I'm working on it. So I want to go to the next subject. We're going to get low in time. I wanted to kind of speed through some of these, and I certainly want to come back to Sergei. I did get this question. I don't think this is a real, let me go here. I don't think this is a major question, but some people say, how long will this last? And that's a question I had when I was getting ready to do this. And I said, what do you mean? Well, will there ever come a time where technology, oops, I just took it off screen, didn't I? Sorry, guys. Boom, boom, boom. There will be a time where, will there be a time where that will not be the case? I think what they were thinking, and I want to bring it up was, is technology going to replace this? I've heard some really crazy things, and I think Chris, you have, and maybe Sergei, technology and phones and AR and augmented reality is going to start playing a lot of piece of this. But I think there's always going to be a third-party consultant. I think we're going to see more of them, but I think they're going to increase their data and technology. So they've got data, like statistics and data. They know exactly what's working and what's not with what. Listen, I know consultants that tell me I know how to work with franchises as opposed to guys that are big behemoths of companies. They literally do work on their processes and systems that much. So I don't think it's going anywhere. I think, like we've already said, it's going to be becoming more involved with some of your smaller claims. Sergei, would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, and not only that, but we're continuing to give them ammunition. If we're not improving our processes and they are, and they're collecting that data and they're learning how to do this and they're using the proper channels to acquire this, they're validating their need and presence in the market. And the slide that you showed about the insurance companies making all that money, we have State Farm, one of their 3 huge facilities here. It's a $1.1 billion facility. You don't build that on just paying out everything you're supposed to. They find a way, and as long as we the restorers continue to give in and cut our invoices in order to to make them happy, that's just continue to collect more data for them and validating their needs.
They're going to start using technology on the mitigation side. They're starting to show up more and more. They were, I guess, pre-COVID, but I think they will post-COVID here in the next 6 months to a year. They're starting to reach out to instructors. They want more instruction. They want to learn more about the mitigation process. They want to learn more about the science on the back end of it. And they're willing to pay for that data, and they're willing to pay for that technology. And they're going to utilize that technology to make sure that the project is handled properly, whether it's equipment sizing, whether it's, is the job evaporating water as fast as it can, those types of things. They're ultimately going to invest in education and data and technology. That's for sure. And we as an industry need to keep up with it on our side.
$4 billion in property and casual, or if I've got 4.8 for All Snake, if I've got that kind of money and I plan to be doing this for a while, I'm going to be investing in the smartest people I can find, the best behavioral modification consultants, the best of everything, the best technology for the long game. Again, they're spending money today to make 10 times, 1,000 times that over the next couple of storms. Before I go back to this thing, someone told me one time, and I can't wrap my head around this because I was in Katrina. They said that the insurance companies eventually actually made money off of Katrina. And you know how they did that? Everybody, how do they recover their cost? They go up on their premiums the next year in mass. And so they just up their premiums. And the same thing, I was in the BP oil spill and they lost billions of dollars. But you know what? I heard one executive say, we'll make all that back up in the next couple of years of selling more, a couple of cents a gallon more. So believe me, guys, it's not about us. It's not small, but we've got to play the game. They're not going anywhere. We've got to certainly step into what are we doing on our side. And, we were talking earlier about make a relationship. If you come across a third-party consultant, the success you have with working with them could mean that the next time you work with them on another project, maybe they don't come out, or maybe when they come out, it's just like, oh yeah, there's already a comfort level. I remember working with you. You were real fair. I like how you did it. I wish everybody did it that way. And so your relationship, but if you go into them with your boxing gloves on, and you're, an octagon, you're probably going to be fighting on every single one. You're going to build up a grudge match. Would you guys agree with that? Have you had any relationships turn great or bad in the past?
Yeah, and I think one thing I've done is, if you receive an email from a TPC and your blood pressure starts to go up or your heart starts to pound and you just feel, man, they're just coming after me a little bit, don't respond. Give it 24 hours. If it's not an emergency to respond to them about this situation, give yourself 24 hours, put together your thoughts, and then approach it from the standpoint like Clark's talking about is how can I look to build a relationship with this person? Because for me, even when you brought up Erie, for us, when we're dealing with these TPAs or TPCs, typically, we want to take care of this claim and settle this claim, but I also want to build a relationship for the next 10 claims and the next 100 claims that we're going to have an understanding for the next ones that come up. So we've been able to build those relationships. I was just talking to a guy yesterday and he said, oh, last time I worked with you guys were great. And in the end, we got the thing done really, really quickly. He was super professional, super simple, super easy. So it does come back on the next claim. Don't always just think this guy's trying to attack me on this claim. So you will deal with at least the same companies over and over, even if it's not the same exact individual.
We've got over here, Mike Hoban said that's good if they invest in knowledge. This way they understand our documentation and we'll get paid as professionals and not as a commodity. And that's the goal. To be professional, we've got to be professional. To be seen as professionals, we've got to step up. I think a lot of people claim that and they aren't quite always there. And I don't mean present company. I mean, there's a lot of people, we all know the hundreds and thousands that aren't on these webinars looking at how they can be better are the ones that think they already have it all figured out. So Mike's exactly right. And then Dwayne, how do you guys feel about the TPC that are not experienced in mid or recon? Is it our place to train them, especially when they are questioning a line item? Ooh, good one. Sergei?
I actually love that question. I actually have a really good relationship with a TPC, and sometimes I get calls for him just trying to brainstorm and figure things out. I never go into attacking restoration company or saying that they charge something wrong because obviously I don't know the details of that project. But what happened was we were on a project and I think the guy just got promoted from a smaller position to a higher position, and maybe he just wasn't trained well enough because he was a little honest with me on that project. And oh God, this had to have been about 8 or 10 years ago now. And we were handling a large commercial loss. And at that time, 10 years ago, our industry was behaving a little bit differently, and certain remedies that we were using were a little bit newer, and he wasn't familiar with it. And rather than getting defensive and say, well, this is my time, and you're supposed to know this, and you're the TPC, and why are you hired as a consultant if you don't know what you're doing? I just chose a different approach, and I helped him understand it, and I explained it, and I justified it. I never did it in a way to affect his ego. And it turned out great. And we've gotten jobs from him, and we've seen him on jobs, and he's called at other things. He's recommended us. So there is an opportunity for it to work out well. I guess it's really going to depend on who that TPC is as a person, and are they just going to take this information from you and then try to go beat somebody else up with it? Sure, it's possible, but you know, as Chris was saying, you can't just approach everything with a fight. They got a job to do, you got a job to do. The best job in the world means nothing if you don't get paid for it. So as long as you understand that we're in the business to make it easier and to make a profit and get the job done and take care of the customer and everything else that comes with our responsibilities, it may make your life a lot easier if you educate them, because he may fight that battle for you with the carrier or the adjuster because now he knows better. Definitely take that opportunity. I believe if somebody comes to you and they want to learn and they're open to it, I always try to share my knowledge with them, and hopes that when I run into them in the next one, they're just going to let me go by because they're going to look at you as the expert.
Awesome. We do have a question here. Were you about to say something else, Chris?
Oh, no, I thought Dwayne's question was a great question. And I think that's one thing to respond. When they ask you a question, tell them that's a great question. Let me explain. You still got to justify that line item. If they're asking you the question, just justify the line item. I'm not saying you need to go through and train them on every single thing, but I think you do need to explain why you did what you did and be able to justify that line item. But it was a great question.
We have a question here, an open question from Robert again. Thank you, Robert, for asking. Can you share an example of what should be included in the quote unquote perfect TPA TPC proof mitigation file? This may be a topic for a future webinar discussion thread in the AIR portal. I love that idea. I would love to see, again, I don't think there's any one right and perfect way. I think that there might be a very good example or several good examples of. I know Chris and I at one point, Chris is so busy. I have more ideas. I think I get Chris more pulled into more webinars. Actually, we have 2 this week. I think we have a lot of ideas, and we were going to do one time about documentation with a few other people, but it just becomes time sensitive. But yes, Robert, I think that there are some general good examples of that. But again, with every job being different, it certainly would leave a lot. But there may be some good looking templates out there. Then I wouldn't mind contributing to that. But I would probably put that into AIR for right now as very exclusive content. And so that brings us up. Go ahead.
I'd be happy, Clark, if you wanted. I would be more than happy to share with you at least, and you can share it with everybody if you wanted. But just what we use as an Excel spreadsheet, we lock it down when we send it. But it's just a very, very simple Excel spreadsheet that it's probably got 15 tabs, and we can do we use it. We don't use it on residential, but we use it on all our commercial projects. And we have found that template from the documentation side doesn't include photos, but from a documentation side, we've had multiple TPCs be very happy with looking at that data. It's just a matter of putting all that data together all the time. And one more thing I was thinking about earlier, and I forget what slide it was, but when those TPCs are going to show up on the site and they're coming out, having your documentation prepared up to the point you are currently, from a cost to scope of work, photos, have those things ready for them when they walk in, so that they're walking in knowing right out the gate that you're ready to discuss at least where you are currently on that project.
Chris, I agree with you. It's something I did a few times when I thought about it or I had an opportunity, especially as I used to travel and do this. Bring the final binder, bring the final product of a last job or an example of this is what it's going to look like. This is what you're going to get from me, and it's going to be all the backup and all the documentation. That again, if I'm a TPC and I'm just going to go down that road from the beginning, if I've got someone and saying, "Hey, I know that you've got a job to do, but this is where I think I'm going to be," I think that's a pretty powerful thing. I did that 2 or 3 times, and it had amazing wonders. Um, let's get back to getting this thing closed out. And I want to take a few more questions, but yes, Robert, we'll this all gets saved in this webinar, and we'll certainly put some stuff together. And Chris, yeah, let's if you want to take your branding off that and throw it into the air group. And I want to talk about that. What do we do today? Again, this is my pitch. This is the part. This webinar was not meant to be a click funnel, but I will tell you that all those that slide I showed you on those insurance companies and each one of them, they are unified within their own company. You've got everybody there generally pointed towards one goal, one vision, and the process that do so. We as an industry of contractors aren't set up that way. We're all just going different ways. We're using what we learned, copy and paste. I have a dream. John Grubb has a dream. Chris Laney, Sergei, everyone that's currently a member of Air Restore, the Alliance for Independent Restorers, have some type of vision of what they want this thing to look like, this industry to look like for generations after us, or even some of our own, and get to survive some of the fruits of our own labor. What can we do today? Give us a shot. Join AIR today. Go to airrestore.org if you aren't already a member. I know we've got a lot of people here that aren't. We just recently, and I don't know who all, Sergei's seen it yet or anybody, but we have a new platform. We're trying to take some of these. The whole thing about Facebook has always just been a place for us to commune and talk as a group. And Facebook was great in the early days, but we now have built our own universe, our own platform that within about 2 weeks will be an actual app on your iOS or your Android to have private, unfiltered, no political, no memes, no burning of the streets in Seattle. All that stuff is shut out because that has completely caused me to despise social media because I think it's a dredge of things. So we need to have a place and a way and a format that we have professional conversations, collaborations, build out these kinds of these kind of webinars, create the stuff like Robert is talking about there, and then to drive down one further. And I know Sergei is involved with it, but at the local level, your local contractors and your local professional peers and other service providers, even asbestos guys and whatnot, getting into chapters. And we have that all the infrastructure is there. It's no extra cost to be in a chapter. It's really something that in Phoenix or in Salt Lake or in Indiana or Texas, we just had a big 25 different companies were together last week in Texas. And there was a mold assessor instructor there because in that state, mold is regulated. An incredible conversation. Steve Patrick was there from Level the Playing Field. We had a PA that came in. We all had our own ideas about a PA. Came inside, he owned it. He said, "Yeah, we've got a bunch of bad PAs in our field, just like you have a bunch of bad restorers, but there are some good ones." And we talked about what that might look like. So, there are times when maybe appraisal and PAs are part of the claims. But I will tell you right now, join airrestore.org. Join us. We have now started, if you go to airrestore.org, one of the options is a 7-day free trial. What does that mean? Come in and kick the tires, do some burnouts, test some stuff out. You will not have access to the incredible large library of webinars, videos, training sessions, documents. We won't have all of that. You'll have some things that will be limited and not there, but there'll be a lot. And you will come into our community. We have a forum there. It's really incredible. It really looks a lot like Facebook. Again, it's professional, and you'll be amongst professionals. And that to me has always been, I don't care what we get. I don't care what kind of deal our affiliates give everybody and all the value. Being amongst peers who are trying to put together things like this with these two incredible guys that are with us today, that's something that we need to do more of across the industry. I'm friends with Chris, and Chris is friends with the RIA really, really close. I think we're trying to bring the ICRC and REITs and all the other parties that claim they're trying to improve this industry. We want to be at the same table. We're not all going to agree on the exact same way to do it, but somewhere in there is going to be the recipe that some people are going to see the example of and take. So anyway, did you any questions or anything? Any Chris, Sergey, did you want to wrap this up with anything that was great? Because I think it was some good questions from the audience. Anybody have anything? We had a good number of people today. So we had 25 or 26 registered. I think half of that showed up. Keith Sproles is here. I've got Sean Ivory, Steve Marceau, just some really good guys. And if anybody had any questions or examples of that, I'd like to hear what you did.
I think the end goal, Clark, you talk about the vision. When it comes to mitigation, I guess my ultimate vision is to speak the same language, whether it's with the TPCs or the carriers. And I think we'll get there. I think it's going to take a few more years, but I think a lot of that's through education. But once we start speaking the same language collectively with good carriers, good TPCs, and good restoration companies, I think we can make this process a little bit smoother.
Happened in a real small way is Gordie Powell last week was able to get the House Bill 417 in Georgia 2 weeks ago signed, and that's bringing trauma in as an official regulated trade, trauma clean, crime scene cleanup. If restoration, or let's call it remediation professionals, technicians, whatever you want to call it, becomes an official trade, like a plumber and a heat HVAC and a pipe fitter and any of those auto mechanic, then we start to see some unification of what it does, some opportunities for education to pick up, maybe trade schools to start really growing. And then lastly, we start to see a better example of what looks right and what looks wrong by a trade. Standards will define it. We have those now, but I just think that a lot of people ignore them. I don't like government inclusion too much, but I'd like to see what that continues to look like. It make a master restorer really mean something. How about a master restorer is required to be on staff of any company? Those kinds of things start to really evolve and change in industry. So those are some. And Jim Hiscock and I met with a gentleman out in Seattle when I was out there 2 weeks ago from PHCC, the Plumbing Heating Collaborative Council. They're basically a trade association that helped redesign the trade regulation for those fields, and they've seen a lot of improvement over the last couple of years. And again, he's like you said, Chris, this is not something that's going to take 3 or 4 years. It's something that's going to take a generation to start evolving. But if we don't start that now, I don't think they're going to start it on their own, and the carriers are going to eat us alive and take us away. There won't be anybody left except for maybe the big behemoths, and it'll be like Mike said, we'll be a commodity at that point. You can go to Home Depot and get some fans. You can dry out your own house at that point, right? How do we keep that from happening? So, Sergey, any closing words?
You just said, it's hard because there's so many restorers, and we often fight each other as much as we fight the carriers. We got to come together. We got to try to do things together and try to share information. But at the same time, we have to start respecting each other. If a adjuster is reaching out to you to review an invoice, don't cut that invoice to gain a piece of the pie in the future and destroy somebody else in the process. You're not helping a greater goal, because they're using that data and they're coming back and saying, well, look, this restorer, we cut his invoice, we cut this invoice. So I like what you're doing here. I like that it brings us together in a platform where we're comfortable to share this information and we can help each other improve and grow. And ultimately, that's the goal. There's plenty of work to go around, and there's always going to be guys who are doing it bad, but try to find the guys in your town and your group that are doing it right. Get together, strategize, plans together, try different things, share some education. I'm a big believer in education. I try to teach my guys as much as I can, teach our clients as much as we can. That's really the recipe. But I'm happy with what you're doing here, and I think it's moving the right direction. But it will take some time, and we gotta have to put in some effort.
Yeah, if I could take the last 4 minutes and give an example of 2 examples. Chris and I were fortunate enough to meet for the first time in person in a city called Bend, Oregon. Our first summit that we had at that point, really was not even structured to be what it is right now. It's really just a group of restoration rebels that got together and said, hey, what's this about? It was really the first event like that in my, at that point, 16 years I've been in the business. The first event that I've ever been to, and what I saw, besides the incredible presenters and speakers and educators, which ranged from Sean Michael Lewis to Kevin Dooley to David Sweet, R. David Sweet, Ben Justinson was there, really some incredible people. Besides that, it's the, and Chris, not if you agree with me, but it's the conversations that were happening between sessions, after hours, at dinner. People like to be around people like them, even outside of their district, to confirm that they're not crazy in the ways they think about seeing things, and also learn new ways to see things. So I learned that early on, and we've always tried to sculpt this association around primarily the networking opportunity, the community involvement, the cohesion and collaboration available through that. And I think the chapters do heavily include that. There's only so many things that your competitors will want you to, you'll talk about with them. The rest of it might be nationally. But did you feel like that, Chris, the same way, that just getting with some other people who do things completely different than us is a powerful thing?
It is. It was fun out there in Bend. It was a small group of guys and gals that were there, and it was nice just to see everybody. We were in such a small group that I think it made it really, really nice to just share ideas and share thoughts. And it was, it's amazing where it's came. And I think it was 5 years ago or so we were out there, and where we sit today. But I can say that I've said it for a long time. I said it back on LinkedIn years ago. We got to move the needle. And if I sit back and look from where we were in Bend to where we are today, that needle's moved a ton, and it has to do a lot with a lot of different people throughout the industry. But we keep going in the right direction, keep doing good work, and I would love what you were talking about for this industry to become a trade like that, like what you're talking about with that plumbing and heating group. That would be a huge success, and what those guys did down in Georgia with trauma is a huge success.
Talking about this industry moving the needle, and I don't think I'm speaking out of terms. This kind of movement, this kind of, we've been doing some radical things, or at least in the eyes of this industry, radical like it's never been done before. It has spawned a couple of things, and I will tell you, I think that much of the AGA's drive right now comes from some of the conversations that we all started having years ago, meaning you now have permission to represent the entire industry. There's something bigger out there going on that we're not tackling, which was, pricing feedback on Exactaware, the misuse of Xactimate or the misappropriation. And then now they're doing a TPA, TPC things. Again, I applaud all of those. I support those. AIR is a contributor financially and on a panel to that. And I think those conversations, what about all the other things we're not talking about yet that we could if we combine together? And I want to close out on one more thing that I thought, taking from our conversation in Seattle last week on how this can affect your local market. Jim Hiscock is the president of the Alliance, the AIR chapter in Seattle. He's actually happens to be a master plumber as well, and he now owns a restoration company. But he said he will never let go of his plumbing, because he took him $10,000 to get that. He's proud of being, he keeps that current. But he told me a story about, there's one plumbing company in town that was the premier. They were, and he said they were $500 an hour. So I guess in the terms of, that's how they measure a plumbing and trade houses. What does a plumbing tech earn their company in an hour's time? So the moniker was they were around $500 an hour, which the whole city said, oh my gosh, they're super expensive. They're blah, blah, blah. But they had service standards that everybody wishes all other contractors did. The booties, they were the first ones to do all these incredible customer service things, gave options, blah, blah, blah. What happened over a course of period of years, because they never moved. They stayed right who they were against all the criticism. They kept growing because more people came. All the other lower line people in the market that used to be around 80 to 120, where do you think they went? They went up to 250 and 300. All ships rose because of that tide. They can all send a check if they want to that person that owns that company and say, thank you for doing this. Even if we didn't see it, you did something for the rest of us. So everybody in our markets is trying to do the cheapest. You're not only hurting yourself substantially, you are hurting the rest of the industry, and it doesn't have to be that way. Come join us. Come talk to us professionals. Let's show you instead how to price what you need to, but to validate what you do. Because I think that's the only part that's missing. You don't think you're worth everything else, so therefore you take the lower jobs. And that to me was a big conversation to see that plumbing, everybody in town went up instead of the low level guys. I think carpet cleaning probably has the same issue, right? Carpet cleaning industry and probably any trade at all. So anyway, guys, listen to Chris, Sergey. You guys are amazing. I knew this would be an incredible session. You guys killed it. You can find both of them on air on LinkedIn. I would definitely recommend if you're in anywhere in the country, but especially in their local markets. They like food, buying food and coffee. They would love a meal. And this session will be available as a recorded podcast or a video webinar on across. I'll put it on air. I'll definitely put it online, and it'll be available. So save it. Those of you that are watching it will get it via email anyway on the backside, so you'll get a copy of it. But talk to your people that you know and say, if you really want to start doing something better, come help us build something better. So anyway, without any further ado, I appreciate all of you giving me some time today.
Thank you, Clark.
Sergey, Chris, take care.
Thank you, guys.